March 15th, 2024. Thunder Cane's Gym, 6:47 p.m. The 300-pound bodybuilder they called Titan had just stepped through the door. Vincent Sterling stood behind him, smiling that cold smile Cane remembered from 15 years ago. "You remember our conversation, Marcus," Sterling said, "about settling old debts." The gym went silent. Every piece of equipment seemed to freeze. Titan cracked his knuckles, each pop echoing like gunshots. Cane looked at the photo Sterling held up. Sarah Chen, the paralyzed stuntman's daughter, tied to a chair. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be replayed on security cameras around the world. The footage would break the internet. And when people asked how a 58-year-old man could do what Cane did that night, the answer was always the same. Some fights aren't about size. Some fights are about what you're willing to lose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cane's eyes stayed locked on the photograph. Sarah Chen, 28 years old now. Her father Danny had been 23 when Cane's staged fight went wrong, when a deliberately loosened safety harness sent him plummeting 30 feet onto concrete. Danny Chen hadn't walked since, and now his daughter sat bound in what looked like a warehouse, duct tape across her mouth, terror in her eyes that mirrored her father's from that night 15 years ago. "You son of a bitch." Cane's voice came out as gravel. Sterling's smile widened. "Language, Marcus. There are cameras watching." He gestured to the corners of the gym where security lenses tracked every angle. "Wouldn't want your final performance to be unmarketable." Titan stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the fluorescent light above. The man was built like a concrete mixer, thick neck, shoulders that could support a bridge, arms that strained against his tank top. Prison tattoos crawled up his forearms. His face held the flat expression of someone who'd hurt people for money and slept fine afterward. "Here's how this works," Sterling continued, tucking the photo into his jacket. "You fight Titan. You lose, badly, on camera. The footage goes viral. Washed-up stunt coordinator gets destroyed by real fighter. Your reputation dies, your gym closes, and you disappear into whatever hole broken men crawl into." Sterling paused. "Or you refuse, and Sarah Chen learns what her father felt when he hit that concrete." The gym's other members had quietly evacuated. Word traveled fast when trouble walked through the door, and Cane's regulars knew the signs. Only Mrs. Rodriguez remained, pretending to organize towels near the back while keeping her phone ready. Smart woman. She'd seen enough violence in her 73 years to recognize when it was about to break loose. Cane studied Titan's stance, his weight distribution, the way his hands hung loose but ready. Professional. This wasn't some gym rat pumped full of steroids and ego. This was a man who understood violence as a craft. "The Chen girl," Cane said. "Where is she?" "Safe. For now." Sterling checked his gold Rolex. "You have 60 seconds to decide." Cane's mind raced through calculations. Titan outweighed him by at least 80 pounds and had 20 years on his side. But weight and youth weren't everything. Cane had spent 4 decades learning how bodies moved, how they broke, how they could be manipulated. Stunt coordination wasn't just about making fights look real. It was about understanding the mechanics of violence so completely you could control every outcome. The problem was, Sterling didn't want Cane to win. He wanted Cane destroyed. And something in Sterling's eyes suggested Sarah Chen's life wasn't the only thing hanging in the balance. "Why now?" Cane asked. 15 years, Vincent. Why surface now?" Sterling's mask slipped for just a moment. Cane caught a flash of something deeper than money, darker than professional revenge. Personal, raw. The kind of hatred that festered in silence, growing stronger with time. Because 15 years ago, you broke the wrong person. Danny Chen. Cane had always wondered why Sterling cared so much about one stuntman's accident. Accidents happened in Hollywood. Money changed hands, NDAs got signed, careers continued. But Sterling had been different. He'd pushed harder for the cover-up, paid more to keep it quiet, seemed almost desperate to control the narrative. "Danny was family," Cane said. It wasn't a question. Sterling's jaw tightened. "My little brother. Different names, same mother. He looked up to you, Marcus. Talked about you like you were some kind of hero. right up until you sold him out for 30 pieces of silver." The pieces clicked. Sterling had arranged everything, the staged fight, the payoff, even Kane's participation. But something had gone wrong. The safety equipment had failed or been sabotaged. Danny had fallen, and Sterling had spent 15 years planning this moment. "You set it up," Kane realized. "The whole thing. You wanted me to throw that fight from the beginning. I needed footage of you losing. My career was already sliding, and beating up the great Marcus Kane on camera would have given me credibility. But you were supposed to take a few hits, go down clean, and everyone walks away richer." Sterling's voice turned venomous. "Instead, my brother gets crippled because you couldn't follow simple instructions." Titan shifted his weight, growing impatient. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, probably unrelated, but they added urgency to the moment. 30 seconds, Sterling announced. Kane glanced at the security cameras, thinking about the footage that would soon flood social media. About Sarah Chen tied to a chair somewhere in the desert. About Danny Chen, who'd never walked again because Kane had been too proud, too stubborn, too convinced he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Some fights weren't about winning. Some fights were about accepting the consequences of choices made in darkness, years before consequences seemed to matter. Kane pulled off his training gloves and dropped them on the floor. "Let's finish this." The training gloves hit the rubber matting with a soft thud that seemed to echo longer than physics allowed. Kane flexed his bare hands, feeling the familiar ache in his knuckles where old breaks had healed crooked. 15 years of quiet mornings, of coffee brewed before dawn, of unlocking the gym doors to the smell of disinfectant and honest sweat, all of it crystallizing into this moment. Titan rolled his shoulders, a sound like leather stretching over concrete. The man's presence filled the space between the bench press and squat rack, transforming Kane's sanctuary into something else entirely. This wasn't a gym anymore. It was a cage. Kane's eyes swept the familiar territory one last time. The motivational posters he'd hung crooked and never straightened. The ancient sound system held together with duct tape and stubbornness. The corner where Tommy Hernandez had proposed to his girlfriend 3 months ago, dropping to one knee beside the lat pull-down machine while she laughed and cried simultaneously. This place had become more than a business. It was redemption measured in daily repetitions, in lives slowly rebuilt one workout at a time. Maria Santos, who'd lost 90 pounds after her divorce. Old Pete Kowalski, fighting back from his heart attack with religious dedication to morning cardio. Even Mrs. Rodriguez, who came in every Tuesday not to exercise but to water the plants she'd installed without permission, treating the gym like the community center it had accidentally become. "You're stalling," Sterling observed, checking his Rolex again. The gold caught the fluorescent light, throwing small reflections across his artificially tanned face. Kane wasn't stalling. He was remembering. The weight of Sarah Chen's photograph in Sterling's pocket felt like gravity itself shifting. 28 years old, Danny's eyes, her mother's cheekbones. Kane had never met her, but he'd carried her father's accident like a stone in his chest for 15 years. Every morning when he opened the gym, every night when he closed it, Danny Chen's broken body haunted the space between intention and consequence. The truth was simpler and more terrible than Sterling's elaborate revenge. Kane had been drunk that night. Not visibly, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough to slow his reflexes when the safety harness snapped. Enough to miss the telltale signs of sabotaged equipment. Enough to let a 23-year-old kid fall 30 feet onto concrete because Kane had been nursing a bottle of bourbon and his wounded pride instead of doing his job. Titan cracked his neck, the sound sharp as breaking kindling. "We doing this or what?" Kane studied the man's face, looking for something human beneath the scar tissue and professional indifference. He found nothing. Titan wasn't cruel. Cruelty required emotion. He was simply a tool, finely crafted for breaking things. The kind of man who'd learned violence in places where it meant survival, then discovered people would pay handsomely for that particular skill set. "Where will you go?" Kane asked Sterling. "After." "What?" "When this is over. When the footage is online and Sarah Chen is..." Kane couldn't finish the sentence. "What then? You've spent 15 years planning my destruction. What do you do with the rest of your life?" Sterling's smile faltered. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered behind his eyes. The kind of pain that came from carrying someone else's suffering, from watching a brother struggle with phantom limbs and abandoned dreams. Kane recognized it because he'd been carrying the same weight. "I sleep," Sterling said quietly. "For the first time in 15 years, I sleep." Mrs. Rodriguez had moved closer to the exit, her phone clutched in arthritic fingers. She caught Kane's eye and tapped the device meaningfully. Help was a phone call away. Police, paramedics, the kind of intervention that might save his life but wouldn't save Sarah Chen. Kane shook his head almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Rodriguez's face crumpled with understanding. The gym's air conditioning cycled on with a mechanical wheeze, stirring the motivational banners that hung from the ceiling. "Pain is temporary. Quitting lasts forever." Kane had bought that one at a motivational speaker's garage sale, thinking it was corny enough to be inspiring. Now it felt like prophecy. Titan stepped onto the main floor mat, his weight making the rubber compress beneath heavy boots. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, each step deliberate and economical. No wasted motion, no telegraphed aggression, just professional readiness, like a loaded weapon waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Kane followed, his bare feet silent on the familiar surface. How many hours had he spent here? How many mornings had begun with stretching routines and ended with the satisfaction of muscles properly exhausted? The gym knew his body better than any lover, had absorbed his sweat and effort and gradual healing like a confessional that never offered absolution. 15 years, Kane said. Not to Sterling or Titan, but to the space itself. I thought that was enough. He raised his hands and felt time collapse. Somewhere in the desert, Sarah Chen waited in darkness. Somewhere in the city, Danny Chen woke up to another day of limitations Kane had authored. And here, in the only place that had ever felt like home, Kane prepared to pay a debt that could never actually be settled. The cameras rolled. Titan smiled. The reckoning began. Kane's phone rang. The sound cut through the tension like a blade, its electronic chirp absurdly mundane against the weight of impending violence. All three men froze. Titan's hands remained raised, but his eyes flicked toward the sound. Sterling's face darkened with annoyance. Kane felt his pocket vibrating against his hip. The gym's landline was one thing, but his personal cell was another. "Ignore it," Sterling commanded. The ringing stopped, then started again immediately. Whoever was calling wasn't giving up. Kane's stomach dropped. Only 3 people had this number for emergencies: Mrs. Rodriguez, his doctor, and the nursing facility where Danny Chen lived. Mrs. Rodriguez stood 15 feet away. His doctor worked banker's hours, which left, "I have to take this," Kane said, "like hell." Sterling stepped forward. "This is theater, Marcus. Cameras are rolling. You don't get a phone break." But Kane was already reaching for the device, muscle memory overriding Sterling's authority. 15 years of carrying guilt had trained him to expect this call. The one that would announce Danny Chen had finally given up, had decided a wheelchair and phantom pain weren't worth fighting anymore. Kane had paid for the private facility, anonymously, funneling money through lawyers and shell companies to ensure Danny received the best care possible. It was the least he could do. It was nowhere near enough. The caller ID made his blood freeze. Sunshine Manor Care Facility. Kane swiped to answer. "This is Kane." "Mr. Kane?" The voice belonged to Janet Morrison, the facility's head nurse. She sounded shaken. "I'm sorry to call, but there's been an incident. Danny Chen is missing." The gym tilted sideways. Kane gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles whitening. "Missing? What do you mean missing?" Sterling's face had gone through several emotions: anger, confusion, and now something that looked like panic. He lunged for the phone, but Kane stepped back, his free hand raised in warning. "He was taken from his room sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., Janet continued. "Security footage shows 3 men, professional. They disabled the cameras systematically but missed one angle. Mr. Kane, they knew exactly where to find him. This wasn't random." Kane's eyes locked on Sterling, who had gone pale beneath his artificial tan. The actor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air. "Was he hurt?" Kane asked, though he already knew the answer would destroy something inside him. "They were rough." His chair was overturned. There were signs of a struggle. Janet's voice cracked. Mr. Kane, in 15 years, Danny has never once tried to resist his limitations. He's the gentlest man I've ever known. But the orderlies found defensive wounds on his hands. Danny Chen had fought back, a man who hadn't used his legs in 15 years, who needed assistance transferring from bed to wheelchair, who had accepted his fate with a grace that made Kane's guilt feel sharper every day. Danny Chen had fought back against kidnappers in the night. Kane's vision went red around the edges. I'll find him. He ended the call and turned to face Sterling, who was backing away with his hands raised. Marcus, wait. This isn't. I didn't. Where is he? Kane's voice came out as a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout. I don't know what you're talking about. Titan shifted uncomfortably, his professional demeanor cracking. Even hired muscle had limits, and kidnapping disabled men apparently crossed his. Kane stepped forward, and Sterling stumbled backward into a weight rack. Plates rattled like thunder. You have Danny. You have Sarah. You orchestrated all of this. No. Sterling's mask was completely gone now, revealing something desperate and terrified underneath. I have the girl, yes, but Danny, Marcus, I swear on my mother's grave, I don't have Danny. The truth hit Kane like a physical blow. If Sterling didn't have Danny, then someone else was playing this game. Someone who knew about the connection between Kane and the Chen family. Someone who understood that taking both daughter and father would create leverage that went beyond money or revenge. Then who? Kane grabbed Sterling by the lapels, lifting the smaller man off his feet. Who else knows? Sterling's eyes were wide with genuine fear. I don't know. This was supposed to be simple. Take the girl, make you fight, destroy your reputation. That's it. I've been planning this for months, but Danny was never supposed to be. A new phone rang. Sterling's this time. The ringtone was pretentious, classical music that belonged in a concert hall, not a desert gym. Sterling fumbled for the device with shaking hands. The caller ID read, unknown. Kane snatched the phone and answered. Who is this? A voice came through the speaker, mechanically distorted but unmistakably amused. Hello, Marcus. We need to talk. Kane's hand tightened around Sterling's phone, the device slick with sweat from both their palms. The distorted voice continued, each word dripping with artificial calm that made Kane's skin crawl. You're confused. That's understandable. Vincent's little revenge fantasy was never the real game. Where are they? Kane's voice barely registered as human. Safe. For now. Though I imagine Mr. Chen is quite uncomfortable. 15 years in a wheelchair doesn't prepare one for sudden relocation. Sterling had gone completely white, his mouth working soundlessly. Whatever this was, it had spiraled beyond his control. Titan backed toward the door, his professional instincts finally kicking in. Smart money knew when to walk away from a job. Kane tried to process the implications, but his mind kept fragmenting. Sarah Chen's photograph, Danny fighting back in his hospital room, the systematic way the cameras had been disabled. This wasn't random violence or even calculated revenge. This was something else entirely. I'll do whatever you want, Kane said. Just let them go. Laughter echoed through the speaker, mechanical and hollow. Still trying to be the hero, Marcus? Still think you can fix everything with noble sacrifices? Tell me what you want. What I want is for you to understand that you've been playing the wrong game for 15 years. Vincent here thought he was pulling the strings, orchestrating his grand finale. But Vincent is just another piece on the board. Sterling found his voice high and desperate. Who is this? This wasn't part of our deal. Our deal? The voice turned amused. Vincent, you poor deluded man. There was never a deal. There was only what I allowed you to think you were planning. Kane felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Mrs. Rodriguez had vanished completely, probably calling the police, though Kane doubted they'd arrive in time to matter. The gym suddenly felt enormous and empty, full of shadows that hadn't existed moments before. The girl was your idea, Vincent, the voice continued conversationally. You needed leverage, so you researched the Chen family, found Danny's daughter, planned your kidnapping, hired your muscle, all very thorough. Yes, that's... Sterling stammered. What you didn't know was that I've been watching Marcus for years, waiting for the right moment. You simply provided the perfect cover. Kane closed his eyes, trying to think through the implications. Someone had been watching him, following his routine, studying his habits, learning about his connection to the Chen family, the anonymous payments to Danny's facility, the careful distance he'd maintained from the family while ensuring they were provided for. Someone had mapped all of it. "Who are you?" Kane asked. "Someone who understands the true cost of that night 15 years ago." Vincent thinks this is about his brother's accident. How wonderfully small-minded. Sterling's face crumpled. "Danny is my brother." Yes, and his accident was tragic. But accidents happen in Hollywood, don't they? Stuntmen understand the risks. What happened afterward? That's where the real crime occurred. Kane's stomach clenched. The cover-up. The money that had changed hands. The NDAs and carefully buried reports. He'd always assumed Sterling wanted silence to protect his own career, but what if there had been other motives? The safety equipment didn't fail, Kane realized aloud. It was sabotaged. Very good. Though it took you 15 years to ask the right question. Titan had reached the door but hadn't left. He stood frozen in the doorway like a man watching a car accident unfold. Whatever he'd been paid for this job, it wasn't enough to handle whatever was happening now. "Vincent needed footage of you losing a fight," the voice continued. His career was sliding, his reputation cracking. Beating up Marcus Kane on camera would have been quite the coup. But Vincent also had other pressures. Financial pressures, the kind that make men do desperate things. "No," Sterling whispered. "No, that's not—" "Tell him, Vincent. Tell Marcus about the insurance money. Tell him about the policies you took out on your brother just weeks before the stunt." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Kane stared at Sterling, watching the man's face cycle through denial, panic, and finally resignation. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Sterling said quietly. "The harness was supposed to give way gradually, a controlled fall. Danny would get hurt, yes, but not like that." $2 million, the voice added helpfully. Quite a substantial policy for a working stuntman. Enough to save Vincent's house, pay off his debts, fund his comeback. Of course, Danny survived, so the money never materialized. Just a lifetime of medical bills and guilt. Kane felt something fundamental breaking inside his chest. 15 years of carrying responsibility for Danny's accident, and he'd been protecting the wrong person. The guilt that had driven him from Hollywood, that had transformed him into a ghost haunting a desert gym. It had all been built on a lie. "Where are they?" Kane repeated. But his voice sounded different now. Flatter, colder. "Patience, Marcus. We're just getting started." The line went dead.